$28 trillion and counting. That's America's debt, which, despite the somewhat intangible value, is a very real number. But is that all it is? A number and not a real concern? Does the national debt still matter? Depends on who you ask.
At the level of $28 trillion, it can seem more and more like monopoly money.
Andrew Lautz is with the National Taxpayers Union. He aligns with a long-standing belief that the national debt is serious business. On the flip side, a growing number of economists say our skyrocketing debt doesn't make a difference. Here's economist and professor William Lastrapes.
You can potentially think about the government as never have to paying back its debt.
Can that really be true? Let's find out. First, we'll start with the basics. It's all about money in and money out. Every year, the government collects taxes. That's its income. It spends money on public programs, agencies, and infrastructure. That's its expenses. When it spends more than it earns, the U.S. goes into a deficit and is forced to take on debt. The accumulated debt from each year, plus the interest on that debt, makes up the total national debt, and it's 12 zeros.
The debt will grow when the government spending exceeds tax revenues. And this is typical of many developed countries.
Which is true. The pandemic stretched almost every country thin, but even before 2020, developed countries like Canada, the United Kingdom, and Australia all ran deficits. Though there have been years where America ran a surplus, most recently during President Clinton's second term, America still had debt then too. But debt doesn't tell the whole story. Lastrapes says it's important to look at debt in relation to GDP or the size of the economy. If the GDP is growing faster than the interest rate on debt, a country is financially stable. That being said, the Congressional Budget Office estimates America's debt will surpass the GDP by the end of this year, then be double our GDP in 30 years. It would take more than Dave Ramsey to get us out of that.
The way you get out of debt is you get mad.
But let's stick with the current debt. Taxes alone won't cover the debt, so the U.S. Treasury borrows money by selling things like Treasury bills, notes, bonds, and savings bonds to the public. People and governments willing to invest in the U.S. for a small return of interest on their money. Lautz says it's effective, but not foolproof.
The person taking on that debt has faith that the United States will pay it back someday. The more and more we accumulate on our debt, the less sure that guarantee is going to be.
He says to look at the national debt like your credit card debt. As it accumulates, your interest payments get higher, your credit score goes down, and no one wants to lend you money. Think Greece in 2009. Big debt plus little faith in the government equals economic chaos. What's to prevent that from happening to America?
It was risky to lend to the Greek government because you didn't know if you're going to get paid anything back. The U.S., there's no perception by bond markets that the government, the federal government in the U.S. can't pay back its debt, or at least enough debt for it to matter.
This concept is why some economists say the current debt doesn't matter, because paying enough debt is something America has been doing for centuries. Here's a bond from 1792 issued by the newly formed Treasury Department. Reason 1, not to stress the debt. The U.S. has great credit history. Reason 2, big governments like ours can make its own cash, meaning they aren't limited to just their income. Enter the modern monetary theory, or MMT.
The essential point that MMT always makes is that the federal government of the United States, as the issuer of our currency, as the issuer of the dollar, can never run short of money. It can always afford to buy whatever is for sale in its own currency.
That's one of MMT's biggest proponents, Stephanie Kelton, speaking with RJ Esco.
When Congress is prepared to act, it can always pass legislation and authorize spending, even massive increases in spending, without having to stop and worry about this whole where will we find the money and how are we going to pay for it question that's so dogged us for years and years.
Does printing more money increase the risk of inflation? Yes. But Kelton says it gives America options, and as long as the Treasury can print as much money as needed, and as long as America continues to make interest payments, we could keep running with debt forever. Not everyone buys into this theory, which is why people are so divided on the debt. Because if it doesn't matter, why have a budget at all? The debt ceiling, the threat of a government shutdown. If it doesn't matter, then is it all for show?
These silly ceilings on the debt that Congress plays with, there's nothing economic about that. They shouldn't be there to begin with, and they're purely political.
The president would disagree.
They need to stop playing Russian roulette with the U.S. economy.
Back to that trillion-dollar question, does the national debt still matter? What do you think? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and head over to our website to rate this story on the Straight Arrow Bias Meter.